right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are very, very welcome to what is promising to be a very interesting and invigorating Economic Roundtable from Agusto and Cole, the 2025 Economic Roundtable. My name is Rotus Odiri, host of Global Business Reports on Arise News, and there's a lot to be discussed. Agusto could not have picked a better time for this discussion. It's not what is happening in the global economy in Nigeria, what is not happening. So we've got a fantastic panel that is going to be involved in a panel discussion here. A great keynote speaker is going to be talking about a very relevant topic around reforms, tax reforms, and the finances of our country. So, strap in. And also, we're looking forward to having a fireside chat and lots taking your questions as well. So, to kick things off, to set the scene for what we're going to be expecting, please give a warm round of applause to Mrs. Yinka Adelikon, CEO of Agusto & Co.
Thank you, Rotus. Good morning, our distinguished chairman of today's event, Mr. Fola Adiola, our esteemed keynote speaker, Mr. Taiwo Yedele, our panelists, members of the late Bode Agusto's family, the board of Agusto & Co., our online audience, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen in the room. Good morning and welcome. We welcome you to Agusto & Co.'s 2025 Economic Roundtable in honor of our founder, Mr. Bode Agusto. It is an immense honor to stand before you today as we gather for this event. We cannot help but feel the absence of a remarkable individual, Mr. Bode Agusto. His profound insight and unwavering dedication to economic development have always been a guiding light for us. Mr. Agusto's contribution to the financial and macroeconomic space were unparalleled. His wisdom, vision, and leadership have left an indelible mark in this industry. In this era of macro reforms, we cannot but state how much Mr. Agusto would have been such an important voice in the discourse. Today, as we engage in discussions and explore new ideas, we remember his legacy and invaluable impact. Today's event, with the theme, Nigeria's current tax reforms, the impact on households, businesses, and the country, indicates there's a major shift in the Nigerian economic trajectory. And we're here to deliberate on the immense challenges and the incredible opportunities that lies ahead. Furthermore, we're at a pivotal moment in history, where the disruptions to globalization, technological innovation, sustainability, and geopolitical shifts intercepts in ways that will shape our collective future and national development. The Economic Roundtable promises to be informative and engaging, providing valuable opportunities and to better understand the current tax reforms on businesses particularly and on households in Nigeria. Nigeria is at a delicate crossroad. Will policy reforms steer the economy to calmer waters? As a key question. Are part of the issues that the panels will be discussing today, they would also explore other broader areas of the macroeconomic reforms, particularly talking about the opportunities that they see. Once again, I would like to thank everyone in this room for coming here today and for those online as well. I look forward to the fruitful discussions ahead and the collaborative efforts we would undertake to build a stronger and more prosperous economy. Thank you and welcome.
Please keep the applause going for our CEO. She's going to be part of the panel. She's going to be part of the panel discussion. And yes, Nigeria is at crossroads, free markets. That's where we're going. In fact, you know what? Good example. In my research days, I would look up a top, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare, and Agusto would pop up on my search results. They always had a research topic, but I would run away because of the costs. Why? The cost shows the quality and work that goes into putting these reports together. And nobody tells Agusto how to price their reports because it's supposed to be a free market. So I'm looking very much to that discussion we're going to be having today. Ladies and gentlemen, our chairman, I just greeted him this morning before I came. He said, Rotus, I'm seeing you everywhere. I'm seeing him everywhere. And that's because of the amount of activities that are just going on. Again, it's a testament to what's happening in Nigeria's economy. Please, a warm round of applause, our guy at the top, Mr. Fola Adiola, for his remarks. Chairman's opening remarks.
Good morning. Good morning, Yinka. Good morning, Edna. I met Bode Agusto in 1968, and Bode Agusto passed in 2023. And between 1968 and 2023, I cannot recall a day that Bode Agusto and I did not engage. So maybe in this room, other than Edna Agusto and Papai and Fumi Agusto, maybe, and even Papai and Fumi, I can wrestle them. I think that other than Edna, safely, in this room, I've spoken to Bode Agusto more than any other person. It's not a remembrance ceremony of the spiritual nature, but I just think it's fit and proper that we just rise and remember Bode for 1 minute. May Bode's soul rest in peace. Thank you for indulging me. Now, given my relationship, if you ask me what Bode will be doing wherever he is now, he will be holding this kind of summit. Some of us are luckier than some of you because the summit will hold a few times before Bode will sign it off and come out and talk. He was a man of few words when it came to sitting around the table drinking beer. That was not where Bode showed his skill. But any time it involved the economy of Nigeria, Bode's muscles would then expand, and then he could go any length for that. All right. Yinka has spoken about Bode. A few things. I just said to myself, what are we doing here other than remembering or doing something in memory of an exceptional personality? We're looking at Nigeria's economy. I'm not a panelist. I'm just here to learn with Rotus and the panel. But a bit about the economy. Even before the new government came, or the current government came, we all felt that we knew that multiple exchange rate was harmful to our economy. But we didn't have anybody brave enough to unify the exchange rate. Or maybe we had people who benefited from multiple exchange rates. So it wasn't a matter of bravery, it's a matter of with him. What is in it for me? And we kept the exchange rate until Bola Tinubu came. And on the day that he was sworn in, he unified, just holding a microphone the way I'm holding the microphone, unified the exchange rate. And we all said, oh my goodness, why did we wait so long? We found the Messiah. He did what nobody else could do. Even the oracle of Abeokuta said it was a bold decision. That happened. The likes of members of our panel today clapped to no end. With the same microphone in his hand, he said there will be no subsidy anymore. And then we all hailed, yeah, no subsidy, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then that was it. I mean, just that silence. And I remember a song when we were young. A few people may remember that song. Now that we got love, what are we going to do with it? Now we have exchange rate unified, right? Now we have subsidy taken. What next? And it's at the realm of what next that we seem to have been circulating. Consequences of unification which we thought we knew, or ramifications of unification, which we thought we knew. How removal of subsidy was going to boost investment in other areas of the economy, and what we are searching for, okay? Where is the subsidy that we used to put here, and what aspect or what area of the economy is it boosting? Okay, long pause, and on those issues, long pause up to now. We tapped on Taiwo Yedele to reform the tax, and we thought by now the tax reform will have been passed by the National Assembly, and whatever corrections that needed or tweaking that needed to be done, we'll be doing now just to perfect it. Like anything new, there will be certain things that we didn't anticipate. All right, fine. We've read the reform, some of us. We've not read the reform, most of us. But one thing is clear. Most of us that may not have read the reforms are the ones punching at the reforms. And then I sit down and I say to myself, what do we want really? So exchange rate unification has not produced the outcome. Is it because it cannot produce the outcome, or is it because certain things need to be done by those who unified for the outcome to emerge, and so on and so forth? These are my own thoughts. As Bode will say, I'm not an economist. And I hope that some of this, maybe not all, will be taken up by members of the panel. I don't know what they're going to be asking you, but help us, who are not economists, to be able to live and take decisions that are decent for the businesses that we do. On that note, I wish you happy listening. Thank you.
Please keep the applause going for our chairman as he takes the seat. Thank you so much. Singing about love a day before Valentine's Day. Well done. Also, you got the red here, so Agusto is keeping with the times. Let's get our macro background, and well said, sir, for talking about the exchange rate. Nobody talks about the exchange rate when it's coming down. Has anyone checked? It's 1,555 on the parallel market. This time last year, we're touching 1,900. But when it's going up, that's when we in the media start screaming. So thank you for setting the tone on that. A whole lot to be discussed. Next up, as you know, Agusto has lots of subsidiaries. And we're going to hear from the head of Agusto Consulting, Mr. Jimmy Obobine, to give us Nigeria's macro background. Warm round of applause, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, it's good to be here. But it also feels strange to be here without Mr. Agusto. But c'est la vie. So what we'll be doing today, we'll be looking at just over the next 30 minutes. We'll just be giving a quick macro background, and just to set the context and to set the stage for all of the conversations. Our beloved and late founder, Mr. Bode Agusto, used to say to us that the first thing you ask when you get to any country is the inflation rate. That's what he used to say to us all the time, is the inflation rate. And if I combine it then with another proverb from my late mother, she used to say that, okay, thanks. She also used to say that never land on a new place with your 2 feet. Land on 1 foot. And if the place is good, then you land on the 2. So if I combine the 2 proverbs from these heroes gone, Mr. Agusto is saying the first thing you ask about is inflation in any country. So what that means is that inflation is high, then you land on 1 foot, okay? And then if it's low, then you can land on your 2nd foot. So today, when we look at inflation numbers, you decide how to land in Nigeria, whether on 2 feet or on 1 foot. Okay, and so it's very difficult actually to predict how economies would play out. It's quite difficult, especially in times like these where the volatility is quite high. So At Agusto, what we do, our approach is basically to look at key uncertainties that can affect the economy. Key uncertainties, defining uncertainties. For Nigeria, we've mapped out about 10 key uncertainties. The first being our debt sustainability. In Ghana, and I'd also take Mr. Agusto's approach of putting things in context, looking at countries. Anyone who studied finance here would remember what you may have studied in school. The tenets of finance are, you do not default in your own local currency, especially when your local currency is, you do not have you're not in a common monetary zone. So you shouldn't default in your own local currency. So we went to Ghana and we asked the Ghanaians, why did you default in your local currency? Did you have to do this? But at the same time, we're bringing this home. Nigeria's debt sustainability is a key worry point for us. So we have to have it on our gaze. We have to look at it. Because as many of us say that our political parties do not have ideology, it's not absolutely true. In practice, they may not have ideologies in principle, no, in theory, but they've got ideologies in practice. So follow the practice, and then it defines the ideology. So this is obviously, the current party is one that pursues big government. Okay? It's a big government party. And that's why debt sustainability is a key concern. Nigeria's Fiscal Responsibility Act guidance is 3% of GDP. Our fiscal deficit should be 3% of GDP. It's not a law. It's a guidance, even though it's written in a law. Today, we're at 4.5% of GDP in terms of our deficit. So we're 1.5% where our law guides us to be. The oil sector performance, what does this mean? It basically means our production levels. All of our foreign exchange issues can be resolved with one thing: increased production. If Nigeria's production increases materially today, you can land on your second feet irrespective of inflation rates. Okay? So production matters. And why? Because there's a simple way to look at revenue of any organization. An organization that sells bottled water, their revenue is the price of each bottle times the quantity sold. It's as simple as that. For an economy like ours as well, that the crude oil sales form the bulk of our foreign exchange, the equation is the same. The price of crude oil times the quantity of crude oil sold. So it matters to us how much crude oil we produce as a country. If you want to see your naira at the level you desire, produce more. I can imagine what you all desire in terms of the rates as well. The global energy dynamics. The Chinese slammed sanctions. They slammed tariffs on the US supply of energy to them. Not on any other thing, just energy. And the US wants to expand more. OPEC is saying that let's look at the market and let's leave supply at a certain level. How all of these play out is a major issue for Nigeria. And for Nigeria now, it's a two-edged sword. If the prices are high, we earn good revenues. If the prices are high, we earn foreign exchange. If the prices are high, we pay more at the pump for our petrol. So what do we want as a country? We'll decide. Do we want to pay less for petrol? Or do we want to pay more if we earn more revenues and earn more foreign exchange? I think this is one question that actually shows your economic class in Nigeria. For those who travel, they want better foreign exchange. For those whose entire businesses is tied around to petrol pump price, then they want lower pump price. So as an economy, as an inflection point, we have to agree what we want. The global economic outlook. My entire conversation changed when Trump got sworn in. And it's just a relief to see it's just 4 more years. But in those 4 years, the world economy permit me to use a colloquial language, the world economy will hear it. We will hear it. And we thought we had stabilized with all of the bad news that he could produce. But sometimes bad gets worse, isn't it? Yeah. So how do these things affect Nigeria? If the global economy doesn't rise or doesn't increase, economic growth doesn't increase as fast as it possibly can, then whatever affects the world affects Nigeria, because we're plugged into the global economy. We've got businesses, we've got banks in Nigeria who are exposed to banks abroad. And banks in Nigeria are exposed to banks abroad and then do on-lending to Nigerian businesses. So that loan that Nigerian business has is because that Nigerian bank has been able to get an on-lending facility from a bank abroad. So whatever affects the global economy affects Nigeria, affects households, affects businesses. Energy transition and subsidy reforms. What does this mean? How well? Mr. Agusto used to say something in his lifetime. He used to say that we shouldn't be excited about whatever rail infrastructure we're seeing today if it doesn't move cargo. So the excitement is not sitting an AC coach from Lagos to Ibadan that you're paying a subsidized ticket on. The excitement should be seeing cargo on those rails moving from Lagos to Kano. That's the impact. So what we are seeing now is, what do we mean by energy transition? It means that we're trying to convert logistics, the vehicles that convey, that take care of Nigeria's logistics, from diesel, from petrol to CNG. And if anyone has driven out of town, maybe you're going towards Mr. George's factory at Mowe or Shagamu, you would see all of the trailers queued up on the road. And you wonder, why are they all queued up on the road? They are all CNG trucks, okay, waiting to buy. So how much can we transition public transport to CNG? That would also be a key issue to determine whether the subsidy is gone for good. Because the test of subsidy being gone for good is two jokes. 2027, petrol hits 1.5. Then we'll know if subsidy is gone or not. Okay? Socio-political instability, food security. Permit me to tie these together. It's the first time in over 10 years of Agusto doing scenario reviews that we've ever had food security on our radar. We've never had it on our radar. Why? And I'll tell you why we have it this time. Our food that we eat in this country is mainly produced by smallholder farms. A country of 200 million that is fed by smallholder farms. I'm not sure there's any country in the world that runs on such an agricultural model. I'm not sure. I do not know of any country in the world that runs on the agricultural model of smallholder farms feeding that country, especially a country of our size. I don't know what agriculture will look like in Pakistan, but when we look at countries that have huge populations, maybe Pakistan is the only one that will be running close to that kind of model because they've got the dysfunctionality of, their land. So why is that a problem? Every time you hear of the stories of insecurity in the farming belts of Nigeria, that's the middle belt, where 50 people are kidnapped, or what's happening in Zamfara, where people move from their villages to IDPs, IDP camps, beg your pardon, you see the impact at mile 12 on the prices of food instantly. Why? Because the farmers who produce the food we eat have retreated from their homelands and are now in IDP camps where they can't do much. So these were your food producers who now receiving food handouts. So your food producers are receiving food handouts. That's the impact of insecurity to you in Lagos. Even though you do not hear the sound of a gun or you're not seeing the Air Force drop bombs on anyone. But it impacts you when you buy food in Lagos. How well we take care of this? Because as a country, we've had every problem of food security. Every problem under the sun, we've had it, but food security. And that's why inflation hits 40%, depending on who you're talking to anyway. But food inflation, hits 40%. Crossed the 40% mark. And by the time the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics rebases the food basket and the entire food inflation, then maybe all the families struggling with, you need to increase money, I'm not increasing money, will finally come to terms that yes, food inflation is 70 or 80% actually. And the more we have food insecurity issues, the more it increases our risks of socio-political instability as a country. Our government fiscal performance, revenue and spending priorities. I said earlier that this party is a big spending party. So irrespective of how much more money we'll make, our spending would exceed our revenue to push GDP above that to push the deficit above that 4% mark. We're not going to see spending reforms. It's a safe bet, right? So we're going to continually see higher fiscal deficits. Exchange rate, I'll show you that in numbers. Inflation and interest rate, I would also show you that in numbers. Exchange rate, the Nigerian elites are so worried about it, okay? They're so worried about it, but we'll show you how to look at it. Don't worry with exchange rates. Worry about oil production. Worry about oil prices. But I would even worry more on oil production because oil prices is global play. Okay, so let's fix our eyes on production. So let's begin to look at these numbers and see what it looks like. The first, we'll look at our scenarios. How are we measuring our scenarios? We're measuring them around growth. A best case scenario is a GDP growth rate of 4% and above. And this is also the first time in 10 years that we're having a GDP forecast of 4%. Nigeria has had a lost decade. The Indians talk about the Raj rate of growth. We experienced the Buhari rate of growth, which left us at 3% below. Okay? The Raj rate of growth was sometime past in India, the Congress party, some faction of the Congress party in power, not reforming. So we had a faction in power in our government, and it led us to a lost decade where we were stuck below 3%. We're more optimistic, but we're not yet there. 4%. Why are we not yet there? Our population growth rate is 2.5%. The back of the envelope argument says, look, we should try to do at least 5% our population growth rate to lift millions out of poverty in a decade. We should be aiming at a 7.5%. So 4%, we're better than where we used to be, but we're not yet there. A base case scenario of 3 to 4%, and a severe case scenario of anything less than 3%. Under Buhari, our severe case scenario used to be anything less than 1.5 and a recession. So now we do not even have any scenario looking at a recession. So things are better in terms of outlook, even our outlook, our typical conservative outlook. It's better than where it used to be. So let's look at the external sector. This is looking at Nigeria's average crude oil price, crude and production. Remember, I've told you, keep your focus on production. 1.4 million barrels an average of last year. There will be significant debates around our numbers in terms of, this isn't the government's numbers, this is Agusto Consulting's numbers. And we're very conservative and we have no apologies around it. So some would argue that we should be able to do 1.6, 1.7, no doubt. However, these numbers are based on an average, which means that we recognize that there are times where we could go above 1.45, hit as much as 1.6, 1.7, but there are also times where we could go 1.3, 1.4, and best case scenario of around 1.45. If I had to adjust the best case scenario, it would probably not exceed 1.5. Okay? And a severe case scenario of 1.3. Where does this leave us? At the 1.3 severe case scenario, it takes us closer to where in 2022, 2023. And all you need to do when you think about the implications of these numbers is ask yourself, what happened in 22? What was the exchange rate like? We had two scenarios then. We had a fast depreciating currency and we had currency illiquidity. Now that's a big concern. Because irrespective of the currency rate, you want to have it when you need it, isn't it? So liquidity matters. So let's just not keep our eyes on the numbers. let's keep our eyes on the qualitatives around the numbers, which means liquidity also matters. Because a lot of the businesses that ran into trouble in 22, 23, it was all because of liquidity. They had the Naira, but the Naira couldn't find the dollar. And that's what drove up the dollar rate. So you have looked at the prior slide showing our production forecast, and then you say to yourself, but what about OPEC production quota? Our production quota today is 1.5 million barrels per day, and OPEC has left it static till 26. In 2024, it was raised to around 1.4, 1.45, but we've left it at 1.38 because that was a longer number for 24. So you then ask yourself that, is OPEC production quota Nigeria's problem? I would say no, it's not. Vienna is happy to see Nigeria break this quota. Break it if you can. Okay? Break it if you can. Because what this does is, when this quota was raised, Nigerian policymakers made quite a scene about it. But in Vienna, I was like, you've not met the quota all these years anyway, so why are you angry about it? Just break it anyway if you can. So Nigeria is happy to break this quota, and OPEC will be happy to see Nigeria break this quota, okay? Break it if you can. And I'm sure we should all be happy to see us break this quota because it means production increases. It's a good problem to have. It's a better problem to have that you're talking about a quota. Then you leave OPEC like the Angolans did. But I'm not sure we'll get to that level. In terms of oil prices, remember I told you the simple equation you should have in mind, price times quantity. So we've looked at quantity. Now we're looking at prices. All sector industry veterans will tell you, do not predict prices. So we're not predicting prices here. We're just having numbers that we can hinge our forecast on. So what we've done at this $80 per barrel best case and $70 per barrel severe case is to say, look, we've looked at the past. We've looked at oil prices on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and we've said it's a safe bet to look at the best case scenario at 80. So we're not predicting oil prices. You do not predict oil prices. So we've just picked numbers that we can work with. And we've said 80. In Mr. Agusto's lifetime, if he came back and saw these numbers and said, Severe, he says, Jimmy, what happened? Severe, 70 used to be our best case. I'll say the times have changed. So you can see that pricing isn't our problem. Because $70 used to be Agusto's severe case. I mean, it used to be Agusto's best case. Today, $70 is our severe case, which means on a pricing platform, we're at a good place as a country. The issue then becomes our production, which is firmly within our own control. So that's where we need to improve on things. Numbers you may all have been waiting for. Exchange rates. What are our views around exchange rates? Mr. George, you're nodding. Will this keep you awake at night? Okay. So for 25, we're looking at 1,600. And this is even our best case scenario, average. Parallel market, 1,688. However, we'll say something here. Keep your eyes on two things. No, keep your eyes on one thing, because that one thing you keep your eyes on is a pointer to the next thing I'm going to talk about. I told you about liquidity being the core issue, isn't it? Would you get this dollar at whatever rate? How do you measure liquidity in the markets? It's one simple test. The arbitrage between the parallel market and the official markets. The moment you begin to see the type arbitrage we saw in 2019, 199,358, when arbitrage was above 60%. What do we mean by arbitrage? We mean the spread between the official market and the parallel market. Once that spread begins to widen beyond the 5, 10, 15% mark, it then means that the official market no longer qualifies to be defined as a market. Why? What's a market? A place where people buy and sell. Isn't that it? It's as simple as that. It's a primary school definition. A place where people buy and sell. So you've got a market where everybody wants to buy and nobody wants to sell. Is that a market? Good. So once the arbitrage begins to widen to the point where everyone wants to sell on the parallel market, but everybody wants to buy on the official market, then it's no longer a market. So if you're worried around 1600 for your official market, there's even a bigger worry, Mr. George. Because if the spread widens and you see this official market at 1.4, parallel market at 1.7, then we're just going back to where we were. The rat rate of growth. Mr. Diola said it when he came on board, and that he talked about the exchange rate issues. So as much as we want to see tamer numbers, keep your eyes on the spread between the parallel and the official. The moment the parallel starts to leave the official behind, it's a pointer that we're going to have liquidity issues, because everybody suddenly wants to buy from the official and wants to sell on the parallel. In that instance, even exporters say no one is a fool. You can't force me to sell at a certain rate when the person I've sold to steps out of my office and sells at another rate. And that's when exporters begin to leave money abroad rather than allowing the money come into Nigeria. So don't be worried about those numbers. Keep your eyes on the spread, okay? Thank you. Okay, so let's look at central government financing. Revenue of the central government. I'm not going to talk too much about this. Why? Because today is about tax to some extent. And what's tax conversation is about revenues. But one thing Mr. Oyedele, who has walked in here, is trying to achieve for this government is all of these oil conversations we've had. How do we reduce our dependence on oil? That's the essence of the entire tax reforms. How do we reduce our dependence on oil? In other words, how do we get more taxes from everyone sitting in this room? Okay? But let me just focus on the deficit. Now, this is what actually keeps us worried. Remember, we said that this is a big government ideology. So, as much as we're going to make more revenues in this era, because this government knows how to bring in the revenues, would also say that this government knows how to spend those revenues and extra. Okay? So we're going to remain exposed to the deficits. And like we said, 4.5% of GDP is where we are today. And it doesn't seem that all the scenarios, it doesn't seem like any of these scenarios would see us going back to our guidance of 3% of GDP. Like I said to you, when you get to a country, land on one foot and ask about their inflation rate. Mr. Agusto's number when he passed was that Nigeria's average inflation rate had held steady at 12% for 10 years. He never opened an Excel sheet to check that number. What do I mean by that? In other words, take your minds out of the 35% recorded last year and just say, look at Nigeria over 10 years. So in his lifetime, that number used to be 12%. And the US inflation used to be 2% over the same time frame. So he'll say to everyone that, look at the inflation rate differential between the two. The US, because the US dollar is 80% of global trade, so the US dollar matters. And if I were to interject myself and say, will BRICS change anything? There's a little joke. All of the new currencies we're trying to design, actually, their back end is they measure against the dollar. So the dollar still matters. So let's not get into the geopolitics of all of that. The US dollar is responsible for 80% of global trade. Nigeria's long term of inflation used to be 12% and the US 2%. So we do a back of the envelope comparison of the two and say that the inflation spread, the inflation rate differential in Nigeria was 10%, isn't it? You know what it is today? 17. The kinds of numbers that make people say, I'm on the wrong planet. It's 12, it's now 17. Okay? So what that means is that where we are today is even worse off than our long-term rate of inflation. Whether you're looking at it at 12 or you're looking at it at 17. 35% last year. Our best case scenario for this year is 25%. Our severe case is 32. If you're a business owner here, what's the implication of this for you? It means that if Nigeria is even going to achieve this forecast of 25%, it will be on the back of tightening by the central bank. The central bank is going to steer tighter monetary conditions to make loans more expensive. Okay? And that's about the only way we can get inflation of 25%, because we're only using monetary tools to rein inflation today. On the fiscal side, we saw the deficit and you saw huge numbers. It would have been best if we had the two, but we have only one. So for the medium term, we're going to remain a high inflation country. So you ask yourself, I've said we'll remain a high inflation country. What's a high inflation country or a low inflation country? So let's stack it in numbers. Let's stack the buckets in numbers. A low inflation country means your inflation is 3% below. And that's why you see a lot of the people who would have been in this room 7 years ago are watching us on YouTube from outside of this country. Why? Because they've emigrated to low inflation countries. In other words, they asked the same key question Mr. Agusto would have asked. What's the inflation rate in this country? 2.5, okay, I land. Okay? So that's why you see a lot of our young people are doing what? They are fleeing with their 2 feet. Inflation is the driver behind this without you realizing it. And then, what are the yields like? 364 days, that's our benchmark. 22%, best case. But what does this mean for you? Let's look at it. It's real returns. What are real returns? You're comparing the inflation versus what you could have earned on a risk-free asset like the 364-day bills. So if I hold this 1,000 naira, within the year, this 1,000 naira will lose over 30% in value, or based on our best case scenario, will lose 25% in value. But if I use the long term, it's going to lose 17%, isn't it? However, if I pick that 1,000 and I say, let me invest in treasury bills, what's going to happen? I'm going to say, I would earn 22%. So what's the implication of this 22%? Does it leave me better or worse off vis-a-vis inflation? It leaves you worse off, 3%. But still, worse could be worse could be better. So this is a better worse. And let me explain that in numbers. So let me show you that in numbers as well. Okay. So I said to you that long-term rate of inflation used to be 12 to 13%, isn't it? Okay. And look at 2021, 4.9%. Look at 22, 8.5% the Buhari years, which means that even against the long-term rate of inflation, we were worse off holding our own currency in its risk-free form, in a risk-free asset. And that's why smart money fled from the naira to the dollar. And if you pick the asset management industry, for instance, and you look at the AUM of the asset management industry in naira versus in dollar, you would see how the dollar portion of the AUM of the asset management industry has grown steadily. And sadly, because Dave also worked in, for a pension saver, what this means is that as long as the Nigerian, and I'm going off script here, as long as the Nigerian pension savers continue, or the pension funds who are managing our pension savings continue to ride in the naira as its major currency, will end up as poor savers. That's the implication. Because the rate of return is lower than the long-term rate of inflation. I went off script, so let me come back to script. So what's our outlook for our forecast period? What are the key structural challenges that we need to address as a nation? Our structural issues driving inflation, particularly around farming and food security. Petrol subsidy management, we have to sleep with one eye open and ensure that it's not coming back. Crude oil production levels, very important. Security and political agitations. Political agitations has led to an entire region of this country being locked down every Monday for the last 18 to 24 months. Political agitations, it does matter to us. Okay? And we were sent to Imo State a few years ago. You raised your head, sir. We were sent to Imo State for an assignment. And it mattered to us that we had to get in after Monday and leave before Monday. And at the end of the day, those who sent us on the assignment say, did you go to Olu? Did you go here? Did you go there? I said, look, even people in Owerri said, don't go beyond Owerri. And people in Lagos are saying, did you go here? Did you go there? So that's why political agitations matter. Because it's shrinking lots of subnationals, it's shrinking lots of, little local governments. Imagine going to Olu, we'd have spent some extra nights, stayed in a hotel, led to some level of demand in the economy of Olu, but we hold up in Owerri like prisoners, Owerri GRA for that matter. Okay? Youth unemployment, supply of foreign exchange, and someone will say that we haven't even put the deficit we talked about all day here as one of the issues. Why? It will not be addressed. So don't worry about it. Just live around it. Okay? But these we believe should be addressed and can be addressed. Overall, what are our key takeaways? The current administration, we took out subsidy, we harmonized the exchange rate. We expended big political capital on those reforms. That's the reality. And in fairness to this government, no administration has undertaken this type market distorting reforms in the first term. Especially, okay, let me say this one part. Okay, Mr. Oyedele is here, he will talk about tax reform. So when you look at the chutzpah of political might that is required for the current reforms, then on some areas you may begin then to see, look, how much political capital can we expend on certain reforms you want to see? So it could also lead to inertia on certain reforms. Some of us may argue that there should be privatization of assets. It's not happening, at least not what the budget numbers show. Okay? And then there's been a significant upside from currency devaluation on the federal government's revenue position, but recurrent expenditure still remains a worry point. Expected upsides on capex, infrastructure spending will be measured, it's still 30%. Overall, the success of President Tinubu's reforms will be anchored on the sequencing of reforms and policy consistencies. And to just drop the mic, I'll then say that it's important that we're having the kinds of engagements we're having today. We asked Mr. Agusto that what were some of your learnings in the way the Obasanjo regime carried out its reforms? And he said to us that the sequencing matters. Communications of these reforms also matter. And that's why we're glad with the work Mr. Oyedele is doing in terms of that public engagement. We're putting him on the hot mic. We're putting him on the hot seat. Before I leave here, I'll drop my question for him. And this is my last comment. We're reforming taxes, and I was wondering, at 30 plus 2%, I like to look at it that way, Nigeria's corporate tax rate, 30 plus 2, because the 2% matters, so it's 32 effectively. Should we have gone for lower corporate income tax rates to make ourselves more competitive for capital? Because every country, capital is like a bride, and it goes to the country that woos it the most. So at 32% tax, corporate income tax rates, are we able to woo capital, which is the bride? Thank you very much.
Please keep the applause going for Jimmy Obobine, head of Agusto Consulting. That's the power of the brand right there. Speaking of the power of the brand, ladies and gentlemen, he's already set the stage. To be able to get Mr. Taiwo Oyedele here at this time is just, again, speaks to the power of the Agusto brand, because he is a busy man. This is one of the most complex reforms that a country can undertake. So here to give his keynote address on taxes and the impact on households and businesses and the very wealthy people sitting in here who might be paying more taxes. Please, a round of applause for Mr. Taiwo Oyedele as he comes to take the stage.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and sorry I came in late because I had another engagement that I had to attend to this morning, and I had to rush out of there to be here on time. And my friend, that was an interesting presentation, although I do not fully agree with some of the views that you put forward. And it's always good to have those kind of debates. Ultimately, it helps us to be better. In the limited time that I have, I want to discuss the topic that has been assigned to me. Essentially, we'll be focusing on the tax reforms and what impact that has for businesses, for households, and of course, when you talk about businesses and household, you are talking about everything. And then for all of us. Okay. All right. So, impacts of the current tax reforms on businesses and households. If you can just move to the next slide. And what I'm trying to do with this next slide is to say, if the global tax system were race cars, right? These are not exactly race cars, but assuming they're in a race. So the first one will be Nigeria. So can you just move to the next? Who has the control? Okay, thank you, my brother. So this will be Nigeria. This is the 1950s, 1960s Peugeot car. It was good at that time. And the leading countries in Africa will be this. So that's a more modern version. And the developed world will be this. Right, I represented that with the OECD, the most developed. Now imagine being in this race, and you are the Nigeria here. If you like, pray and fast. Your chances of winning this race is 0. So which means, by the way, I believe in God, so, but I'm just saying that even in the words of God, you need to act. You need to do something so God can bless what you're doing. We inherited our tax system from the British, and we haven't done much since 1960. In fact, in some cases, we've made them worse than what we inherited. The Ministry of Finance Incorporated Act is a law of 1959. The British wrote it for us. After how many years? We've been so lazy, can't be too bothered. We did nothing about it. We have stamp duties law of 1939. I'm not sure there are many people in this room who were alive in 1939. We were passionate. So just imagine trying to pass this car, right? Say, I grew up in the village. And in the village, we didn't see a lot of nice cars. We didn't even know the cars were bad. And we didn't have access to the TV. We had only 2 TVs in my village, black and white. Those days that they would lock the thing, right? Cupboard. There were cars in my village that you couldn't tell the make. The bonnet was Honda, the body was Toyota. Anyway, long and short of it is, you need to replace these cars. Stop amending it, stop repairing it. What did we find? We found that in Nigeria's tax system is unconducive for growth. We are trying to grow, but we're struggling. And the tax system is holding us down. It has plenty of taxes and taxing agencies everywhere you turn. It doesn't matter whether you are small or whether you are big, whether you are formal or informal, we tax anything and everything that moves. If it keeps moving, we tax it even again, and we tax it even more. We're speaking to small business owners, and one woman said something to me that I will not forget. She said that it feels like the Nigerian tax system and the government are feasting on businesses. You know, the person lived it every single day, right? It feels like they are feasting on businesses. That's how you feel. And I've challenged anyone who wants to do a social experiment to just do a banner. Just pretend that you want to do any business, anything that comes to mind. It could be tailoring, just write it and place it by the road. Find a plastic chair, sit back about 2 meters away, and watch what will happen. Within 2 days, I promise you, at least 5 agencies will show up. From business premises to advert levy to approval and permit, you have not even found one customer. And I say that one of my hope and dream for this country is that in my lifetime, you put up that banner and you receive calls from different government agencies, one asking you whether you know about credit facility for your sector. We have this capacity development for people doing your business. Would you be interested? Do you need any access to this and that? Let's support ourselves to prosper. Taxes, after all. Thank you. So taxes, after all, is the way that government shares in the prosperity of enterprises and individuals and households. So logically, if I want the size of my revenue to increase, I would encourage economic activities and prosperity to be commonplace. What else did we find? We have high corporate tax burden on businesses. So my friend was even saying 30 plus 2. No, it's not 30 plus 2. We left that bus stop a long time ago. We've complicated it even further. Education tax is currently 3%. And that 3% is not 3%. It's, okay, let me put it differently. It is 3%, but it feels like 6%. If you are interested in doing some maths and analysis, I would ask you to get the report of revenue collected by the FRS over the past 10 years. Take the corporate tax that they collected. You know it's 30%. Then take the education tax that they collected, which is supposed to be 2 and then became 3, right? 2, it became 2.5, it became 3. You would see that on the average, the education tax is twice the impact of the corporate tax. So when you pay 1% education tax, it is equivalent to 2% corporate tax because it's levied on a higher base that we call accessible profit. Accessible profit means your profit before depreciation, and depreciation is sizable. So in other words, for us, when we're doing the work of our committee, we consider the education tax to be the equivalent of 6%, even though it's 3%. So that makes it 36%. Are you still with me? We have the information technology levy paid by some, actually, a lot of businesses. It's 1% of profits. We have NASENI, and we must promote engineering and science in this country. That one too is a separate tax, 0.25%. And then there are so many others that are sector-based. When you're done with all of these, and you want to give the profit to the shareholders, you must remember to deduct withholding tax of 10%. You know that actually businesses are just vehicles for carrying out economic activities. They do not exist in real life. So companies don't pay taxes. Companies pay taxes on behalf of people. Every 1 naira that you ask a business to pay is borne by shareholders, is borne by employees, it could be suppliers, it would be anything and everybody but the business itself. So when you have this high burden, which is effectively more than 40%, and this over 40% effective tax rate on businesses that we have in Nigeria ranks Nigeria in the top 10 most heavily taxed regimes in the world. Nigeria. Even the US, most powerful, most prosperous economy in the world, they cut their taxes on businesses from 35 to 21. As if that's not enough. Donald Trump said at the World Economic Forum that if you come to America to manufacture, I'll cut from 21 to 15%. America is cutting, Nigeria is increasing. How can it make sense? If anybody needs to attract more investment, I think Nigeria should be top 1 in the world to be able to do that. Then we are very good with taxing poverty. We also tax capital. We don't mind taxing investments. Our prayers and aspirations go this way. Our actions and policies go the other way. And we just hope and pray that sometimes in our future they will converge. That's not the kind of prayer that God will answer, because God knows that this problem is self-inflicted. Right? We have to stop doing that. We shouldn't tax poverty. Remember, we said the essence of collecting taxes is to improve the lives, livelihood, and well-being of the people. Normally, we should find those poor people and credit their account on a monthly basis so they can meet their basic needs and not be desperate to be hired by Boko Haram. We are failing because we can't do that. It's now even more painful. We now go to them and say, you have not paid this, you have not paid that. One of the articles I read in the newspaper a couple of years ago, and it broke my heart so deeply. I almost broke down in tears. It was a fairly old woman in Lagos here, Yaba. This woman had to fend for herself. And all she could do was tailoring. So she had this sewing machine that you carry on your shoulder, the base, you carry it on the other side. And she trekked, I don't know how many kilometers to get to Yaba, put down the machine. She trekked because she had no money for transportation. As soon as she put down the machine, they showed up from the local government. Mama, this one, you have not paid. Money for the day is 400. And the woman pleaded, I have not even 1 naira on me. If you can please come back, maybe I would have sold by the time you come back. They refused and took the head of the machine, and they were walking away. And then she was crying and chasing them. I said, this is the height of wickedness. Who does that to their most vulnerable citizen? If you do that and you even pray, I don't think God will answer your prayer, because you are too wicked. That's what it means. By the way, when people pay those informal taxes, they are right to consider them as taxes to the government. Why? Because government is allowing non-state actors to collect those taxes from them. It is not my business to stop non-state actors. I have no powers to do that. Government should. When government fails to do that, then I'll be right to consider all informal taxes collected by non-state actors as part of my taxes to the government. We use archaic laws with plenty of ambiguous provisions. It's already hard to pay taxes. It's harder to struggle to find out what taxes you should pay and who you should pay to. We shouldn't be doing that to ourselves. So this slide is at the heart of why we're doing these reforms. And that is why I agree with Mr. President when he said that he does not want to discuss or negotiate the need for the tax reforms. What is willing to negotiate are the provisions in those proposals. We can tweak them if it is necessary. But let's not start discussing whether we need to reform the tax system. We have to. It's not working for us. It's holding us back. It's making us poorer. We can't attract investment. It's increasing unemployment. It's adding to inflation. Like the inflation numbers that my brother was talking about, even though I have a different view in terms of where I think we would land. But do you know that there is significant part of it that is fiscal and structural, including the fact that in this our Nigeria, we have laws that require that Nigerian businesses pay certain taxes and levies in foreign currency. Just think about that for a moment. This is around $4 billion a year. So we ask Nigerian businesses to go to the foreign exchange markets and go and look for dollars to pay Nigerian government in Nigeria. If they find it, they would have succeeded in adding unnecessary pressure to the naira without adding $1 to the liquidity in Nigeria. That's self-inflicted pain. We've identified those laws and we are amending them. Even this whole idea of parallel market running away from official market, I think that is a problem that fiscal can fix. Although that proposal is not very popular now. They say, if we impose a tax on any premium you have in the parallel market, and I say today, anytime you go to the parallel market, any premium you earn above the official rate is your excise tax and you must pay it within 7 days. What I've done is I've taken away because this parallel and official market thing is a bigger danger than naira volatility. And you can fix that problem permanently with fiscal policy. But then people will bring politics into it, you know. Anyway, I think we'll get there. So, this is my last slide. So I only have 2 slides effectively. So, these reforms are designed to facilitate economic growth, to promote competitiveness, shared prosperity for the Nigerian people, and of course, we also need revenue. The budget of the federal government for 2025, even after the additional amount, is 54 trillion naira. All the 36 states plus the FCT is 26 trillion. Add it up, Nigeria's national budget is 80 trillion naira. Convert it to US dollars, it is under $55 billion. More than 200 million people. Where do you even start? That amount cannot solve Nigeria's problem. So policymakers must start first by recognizing and acknowledging that Nigerian government is too small to solve Nigeria's problem by spending the money that they make. It is that Nigerian government will fix Nigeria by introducing policies that enable the Nigerian people, private sector, multinationals, big firms, small businesses, individuals, to create prosperity. That's a faster way than trying to find $100 billion every year to fix roads. Where are we going to find it? So for businesses, I've decided to put the issues, some of the important ones, in thematic forms. The first one is, we said, how can we reduce business risk? You know that in business and investment, you know, we were taught maybe we didn't listen in those days in school. We were taught that the higher the risk, the higher the return, right? We've realized that that's not actually correct. So it is the higher the risk, the higher the expected returns. Otherwise, if you go and put your money in crypto, or those meme coins of Trump, right? That's high risk, right? Did everybody make money from it? No. But what it means is that for businesses, when they see high risk, they will calculate that the returns must be higher for it to be worthwhile. If it's not worthwhile, or the return is not high enough, then they go elsewhere. That's what is happening. That's why you see companies exiting, right? So we thought what we could do, and there are many of them, but I said I should highlight 3. There's this provision in the Nigerian tax law that says, we don't trust these taxpayers. They may just be making profit and be telling us they are making losses. Anyway, when you finish your business, whether you make losses or whether you make small loss, you must pay a minimum amount of tax. Ladies and gentlemen, we are taxing capital. Companies that are dying, we say you must still pay some tax. That's the fastest way to accelerate the debt. And when they are gone, there shall be no taxes to collect subsequently. So a rational government will help you succeed so you can share in that success with the government, not only just today, but on a sustainable basis. So that provision is going to be out of our tax books. There's also the interest deduction. You don't have enough capital, you want to borrow, it's hard, you manage to just, try to borrow at 30-something%. We have laws today that say, if your interest is too high, exceeding 30% of your earnings before interest and tax, why are you borrowing like that? We will disallow that interest. Who does that? There's no rational human being who would spend 1,000 naira because they want to make a savings of 300 naira. Anytime I spend money as a business, I'm parting with 100% of that amount. If you allow me to do a tax deduction, at best, even with my analysis that I started with, you save me 40% of it. There is no rational human being who will waste 60% because they want to avoid 40%. So government should not run my businesses for me. Allow me run my business, and when we are done, we'll talk about my profit and the taxes I should pay. We've also amended that. There's also the uncertainty that the rules are not clear. You go to the taxman is sometimes not even willing to help. You don't know how far they can go with tax audits. I've seen tax audits where they came and said they're looking for 1998. I said, in 1998, were you working for the FRS? Nobody has the record of 1998. And because you don't have the records, you will not be able to answer all the questions. And if you can't answer all the questions, we call it best of judgment. Best of judgment means it can be if you just wake up on the wrong side of the bed, that can be 50 billion naira. We start discussing it. So we've taken that out. Lower tax burden, reduce the corporate tax rate. So that's why we have the proposal to reduce the corporate tax rate. Although the governors have said we should slow down on that. So we're having those conversations. And then we say, pay taxes in naira, don't pay it in dollars. And then for tax refund, get your refund back on time. There are countries in Africa. In South Africa, within 72 hours, you get your tax refund. In Rwanda, if you are ranked at highest level of compliance, you don't need to ask for your refund. When you submit your returns, and they see that what you have paid is more than what you're supposed to pay, they credit your account before you ask. This is not heaven, no. This is on earth. It's even in Africa. A small country is doing that. We can certainly do better. Then we want our tax regime to be competitive. Imagine you want to set up a factory in Nigeria today. You buy so many things that will be liable to VAT. That VAT is your problem to carry. If you do that in Kenya, you do it in Ghana or South Africa, they give you the VAT back, right? Because businesses are vehicles for carrying out economic activities. Whatever you do to businesses, they do to people. If you don't want businesses to carry too much burden, reduce their burden of taxes. So in those tax bills, we said, going forward, you invest in assets, claim the input VAT back. You spend money on services, get your VAT back. So with these reforms, the cost for businesses should come down drastically by saving taxes. Then should you invest abroad and earn income that is liable to tax in Nigeria, but you also pay tax abroad? We say, we don't have double tax treaties. Nobody is telling us how to run our economy. Why don't we introduce unilateral tax credits? We've put it in those tax bills. You earn income, you bring it to Nigeria. Nigeria will give you full credit for the taxes you've paid abroad, so you don't pay double taxation on that income. We want headquarters companies to be based in Nigeria. Be here and invest in the rest of Africa. Be here and invest in the rest of the world. So that when you're looking for the executive, you hire our people. And they will earn, this our unemployment rate that is 4%. It is because the way we are calculating it. Because you are not supposed to have 4% unemployment rate and you have poverty that is more than half of your population. It's not adding up, right? Some of the people that we counted as employed don't even know that they employ themselves. So, what are we doing for households? We need to provide relief. We all acknowledge, even the people in this room that are not poor people, we all acknowledge that things have been hard, right? So those of us who support, some of us in this room, we support like a whole village. That level of support has increased because their demands have also gone up. So we have provisions in those bills for wage awards to be granted by employers and those things to be tax deductible, including transport subsidy as well, and also tax waivers on food imports, although people have said that this one was not properly implemented. So we're having those conversations on how to improve the implementation of those policies. Then tax suspension of fuel products. Fuel product was a major factor for inflation in 2024. One of the reasons why I do not agree that inflation in Nigeria will be very high in 2025, so I disagree with my friend on what the inflation numbers are likely to be, and I'll tell you why. In 2024, we had exchange rate pass-through. We moved from around 900 at the beginning to 16. At some point, it was more than even 16, right? That's a huge pass-through, but it's transitionary. The second one was fuel. Both PMS in particular, and even also diesel. The prices went up. Now, that wasn't alone. That wasn't the only problem with fuel. It was also the scarcity. Whenever there's scarcity, it has an impact on cost. Because you hold your 1,000 to find a liter and you can't find. You collect money to drive into the fuel station or you buy black market on the road and it's 2 or 3 times. So time wasted, more cost. So it added to inflation. But today, Dangote is there begging people to come and buy fuel. So he has created a reserve for Nigeria with refined products. So we can now say that scarcity of petroleum products is behind us. We don't expect the price of PMS to now move by another 40%. There is no scenario that shows that price of PMS will be 1,600, right? With Trump saying, baby drill, drill, and drill, right? We expect that the price of crude oil would actually moderate. So if you take all all the scenarios we have show that Naira will stabilize, right? It will be stable, if not even recover. So Naira is stable. Energy cost is stable, right? And we have the base effect. The base effect. The base effect means our average inflation last year was 33.2%. It meant that things went up on the average by 33 compared to previous year. If things go up just as bad as last year, they will go up again by 33. But 33 this time around will be divided by 133. And it gives you about 25%. If Nigeria is as bad in 2025 as it was in 2024, and we did nothing about it, our inflation will be 25%. But the things that caused inflation to be as bad in 2024 are no longer there in 2025. Why are we hoping that the rate of inflation will still be high? In Pakistan was as high as 40% by May of 2023. Pakistan was at 40%. Do you know what their inflation rate is now? Pakistan is 4%. So what did Pakistan do? They did not do any magic. Their inflation was mostly because of exchange rate instability, volatility. They got $7 billion from IMF to stabilize their currency. The next one was base effects. In fact, Pakistan has reduced their interest rate, our own equivalent of monetary policy rate, by 900 basis points in 2024. They are now at about 13%. So imagine a country that reduced interest rate by 900 basis points, and they drop inflation by only God knows, maybe like 80 or 90%. So we can do it as well. Let's not create an expectation that prices, by the way, inflation does not mean, when we say inflation will come down, to about 15%. We are not saying prices will come down. You know, people don't understand this. Government is saying that prices will still be higher than it was last year, but it will be higher by a slower rate or pace. So let's not argue that one. Okay. Then, lower the tax burden on the poor. If you're a minimum wage earner, why are you paying taxes? Life is hard already. Exempt those people from taxes. Even the middle class, reduce their tax rate. People have not agreed with me that they are middle class people. I was speaking at a conference in Abuja where majority of them had flown to Abuja and they were staying in 5-star hotel. And they said there's no middle class in Nigeria. I said, okay, so you people inside this room, which class are you? I know that you are not poor. Poor people don't enter planes and stay in 5-star hotel. So if you don't agree that you are middle class, maybe you are high income. And that was when they now reluctantly agreed with me that they are middle class. So we also thought that VAT should not be paid on basic consumption. You need food to survive. You need education to have today and tomorrow. You need medical to take care of your life. So why is government taxing all of that? Let's make it zero rates. And then have exemption for transportation, for rent. The basic things that you need to consume. And then we said, by doing all of that, we are creating a very big hole in government revenue. And we want to be responsible. We say, let's adjust the VAT rate on the other items. And people just decided that they will not talk about the reduction in rates. The only thing they want to talk about is the increase in rate. We've gotten to a point where the government said, don't increase the rate now. Now we're struggling with, can we still go ahead with all these credits we want to give to businesses, zero rates on food? Because we wanted the system to be progressive so that those who pay a little bit more are the people that have the capacity and the ability to pay, as it should be the case in a decent society. We're also trying to create opportunities for the Nigerian people, including small businesses. A lot of exemption from zero CIT to not paying withholding tax or charging VAT are in those bills. Startups, now you can deduct costs you incur even 6 years before you start doing your business or your business commences, because we want to encourage people to take risks, to innovate, and not punish them for not being successful at doing that. Remote jobs, we want Nigerians to be able to sit down in Nigeria if they don't want to relocate and work within the international value chain and earn dollars if they so wish. Philippines, they make average of $30 to $35 billion a year. Of course, India makes more than $200 billion a year. People sitting inside their country, working remotely. But Nigeria created a system, mostly tax and regulatory, that makes it unattractive for multinationals to hire Nigerians in Nigeria to work for them. We are fixing that as well. It was self-created, it will be self-removed. Then if you invest, for those who have extra money, it's not easy to come by that these days. Whether you buy shares or fixed income investment, as an individual, you have very attractive and friendly tax regime. For the bulk of it, you'll be exempt. Where you're not exempt, you pay only just 10%, and it will be the final tax. So to close, the other issues that we're trying to address, which have not been as popular as the tax bills, includes the issue around the social contract, which we expanded to become socio-economic contract. And we said the socio-economic contract is a theory we developed that says that taxes are the consequences of economic activities. So therefore, government policies, including taxes, must not distort economic activities. And when taxes have been collected, taxes are a means to an end, not an end in itself. And it should be used to improve the lives, livelihood, and the well-being of the people. And therefore, government policies, including tax, must not undermine the well-being of the people. That is what we call the socio-economic equation and contract. So we developed a national fiscal policy for Nigeria that outlines how we impose taxes. Don't tax poor people, don't have too many taxes, too many agencies, don't tax capital, don't tax investment, don't tax seed. Wait for the fruit. It's a policy on spending. How do you spend the money? Every time that government collects money from you and they don't spend it to take care of you, they're making you pay more taxes. You know what will happen? You will then use your money to do what government should have done for you. We call it implicit tax. And then, of course, macroeconomic stability and then growth. Our fiscal balance is helping.
Finally see the outcome of these bills in terms of passage and the reforms.
Yeah, so it's now squarely within the purview of the lawmaker, so it's actually beyond my pay grade. But, you know, I watched every second of their deliberations yesterday at the House of Rep, and to be honest, I was quite impressed that it wasn't partisan. Even people were saying, even though I'm not in APC, I support this. And then they have their own feedback about things they needed to do better. What I can tell you is that we see that level of commitment from the lawmakers to make this work. Of course, tweak things where we need to tweak them. And we believe that they will continue to, now we're at the stage, both at the Senate and the House of Rep, where it's now committed to the Finance Committee, and they will do public hearings. So we are quite optimistic that sooner rather than later, the bills will be passed.
On the public hearing, you've talked a lot about awareness and how people, you know, even our chair was talking about how the people who are making the most noise are those that are not even read a lot of these. Encouraging Nigerians to take, and I know people are busy and they work, but participating in this public hearing so that, you know, the man or the woman on the street gets to ask people like yourself questions about this, the importance of these hearings.
Yeah, I think people just need to prioritize what's important. So people spend time today, like everybody has 24 hours in a day. So when people say I'm busy and I can't do something, I'll say, well, it's not because you don't have time, it's because it's not your priority. And I'll give a very simple example. So people in this room are busy. If Donald Trump asked them to come for a meeting, all of them will show up.
Me too, I'll show up.
Almost everybody. So something as so fundamental as tax reforms, people should make out time to read. I'm not saying you should read the 400 pages, but we put out summaries. Do you know that when I do my summaries, I'm very intentional in keeping it to no more than half a page or 1 page. And there was a guy who saw me, a new generation guy who leads a youth group. He said, you can't put this thing in infographics. I say, it's half a page, you can't read. You want me to put it in infographic? Do you know what I summarized to be half a page? So we must make that sacrifice, because if you don't have the knowledge, people will just sway you around. In fact, they will make you fight against your interest. But when you have the knowledge, you know what is good for you, you can constructively engage. So start by going through the summaries we have put out. When you have a bit more time, read the bills. Maybe you don't have enough time, ask AI.
Look, I have so many questions. Only have a minute to go, and you just touched on it. Look, okay, let me jump on the AI thing. What's your thoughts on using technology to streamline government? Elon Musk, private sector person like yourself, who is making a lot of headlines there, is apparently using AI to try to pinpoint government spending. In practical terms, for technology to improve government efficiency, what are your thoughts on that?
I think there is no other way. You have to use technology. So Singapore is the most efficient government in the world. And you just admire how they do stuff. Even Rwanda there, in this our Africa, the way they use technology is so impressive. The system says, there's the rent you collected last year of 12 million naira paid into your GT Bank account on the 15th of June. Do you want to include it in your returns? Let me say whether you skip. Because what that says to you, that information is available. All we need to do is to connect the dots about the intelligence within the system, so we can truly exempt those who should be exempted and those who shouldn't be exempted without any exception to pay those taxes.
After I'm limited my final question because of time. You told a very touching story about the lady you read about that brought you to tears. She's in the informal sector. The guys on the side of...
There is no evidence to show that our revenue is in the informal sector. That is why in our tax reform bills, we have exempted almost 97% of the informal sector. Let them they are trying to survive, let them be, right? When they grow and they have the capacity to pay tax, then let them pay. Someone says, but all the companies in Nigeria will now be small businesses. I say, no, that's because you are not using technology. If we're using technology, the system will tell me that Rotus is the owner of these 5 companies, so as soon
Amen.
as the turnover is getting to the threshold, he creates another one. The ultimate beneficiary is the same. We aggregate it on your behalf and ask you to pay the tax. So certainly, there is a big role for technology. Informal sector should be allowed to thrive. Let's support them. They are our people. They are us. So the 30, 40 million small businesses and households just trying to find meal to put on the table, to buy the exercise book to give to that kid to go to school, to be able to buy pencil. It is bad enough government is not doing it for them. To be chasing them to pay taxes is wickedness, and we have to stop that narrative.
Let's take some pictures. A round of applause to Mr. Taiwo Idele. Please, let's have our chair and our CEO. Mr. Adela, yes, please. Chair and our CEO. Cameras, please. Thank you so much, sir. Round of applause again. Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Taiwo Idele. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Round of applause, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. So, as promised, it was going to be very informative. Now, this is another segment I've been looking forward to, ladies and gentlemen, and this is our panel discussion. So let's bring up our moderator, first off, Wonu Kunle Bello, who is at, of course, Agusto and Co.'s head of funds and investment ratings, and also head of Agusto Ghana. Come on up. Round of applause for her. You're welcome. Okay, our CEO is seeing out Mr. Oyedele, so she's going to be part of the panel. We'll have her back once she comes back in. Ladies and gentlemen, I told him as when I greeted him that I've been chasing him for an interview, and he said I should keep chasing him. Dr. Doyin Salami, who, of course, former head of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council in the Buhari administration and chief economic advisor. There he is. You're very welcome, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a regular on the Arise News Network. It's always a pleasure interviewing this gentleman who has such a wealth of knowledge about capital markets and the economy, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, Group CEO, Cowrie Asset Management. All right, our CEO is back. She was so gracious to walk out Mr. Oyedele as he left. Please, a round of applause again for our CEO, Mrs. Yinka Adelekon. And also, please, a warm round of applause for Mr. George Onafuoka, who is the CEO at Coleman and Cables. All right, one more empty chair, which will be filled in just a moment. Last and certainly not least, Mr. Chinua Azubike, CEO at InfraCredit. Okay, everybody should have a microphone behind the table to either their left or right. You're holding the fort for us, sir. Holding the fort. Thank you. All right, moderator, please take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Rotus. Good morning again, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, my esteemed panelists. Please can you confirm that you can hear me? Okay, good morning, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Economic Roundtable. We've organized this roundtable, first and foremost, to honor our late founder, Mr. Olabode Agusto, and second of all, to set the stage for discussions around key macroeconomic reforms, global events, and to what degree that they're going to affect the financial services sector and the real sector. So our objective with our time is to provide a platform for these experts to give us their insights, perspectives, and knowledge on the topic. So I'll kick off by asking a general question, which I would expect each panelist to answer. And I'll start with you, Dr. Salami. So it's on the economy, and we've heard quite a bit from Jimmy and Mr. Oyedele, but we'd just like to hear from your perspective, the current state of Nigeria's macroeconomic environment. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Very good morning to everybody, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I think a couple of things are pretty clear. To begin with, the economy is unstable. Stability in any economy has like 4 conditions. Condition 1 is that output growth must exceed population growth. In my book, by a factor of 2x. We don't know the size of population, so we don't know the size of population growth, so 2x is whatever you make of it. The second, inflation must be low and falling. The threshold for inflation in Nigeria is between 10 and 15%, and therefore we need inflation to come in that range. The third piece is the fiscal position. You want the budget position as much as possible to, at worst, be neutral. In other words, where we are currently, we are in excess of the Fiscal Responsibility Act provision. So you really need to bring that down. The fourth piece, which is the only piece that we are doing well on, is the external account, because our external account is currently in surplus. Now, so that's one key domain. The second, 3 things I will say. The second key domain is that inflation is high, but food security is an even more troubling piece of that. It's estimated that about 33 million Nigerians are food insecure, and therefore we need to find a way of dealing with that. You cannot have the agric sector growing at about 1.5% and population growing at anything between 2.5 and perhaps 3%. You will run into trouble. The third piece is our energy sector. For me, these are the 2 biggest pain points, agriculture and energy. And energy is, on 2 sides. On the oil and gas side, my view is that Nigeria really needs to be producing at about 3 million barrels of crude oil just to satisfy her own industrial ambitions, not even OPEC or any of that. The second part is, of course, electricity. I'm sure we all saw the news headlines. The national grid is falling down. I can't remember how many times it did last year. Now, but the point is this. Nigeria, the global benchmark is 1 gigawatt of power for every 1 million people. So depending on what you say Nigeria's population is, whether you say it's 170 million, 210 million, whatever you say, Nigeria needs a heck of a lot more electricity than she's currently producing. And the numbers are stark. Our generation capacity is probably about 15 gigawatts. Our distribution public grid is about 6. If you add all the generators ranging from my better past my neighbor to the most sophisticated, it probably adds another 40 gigawatts of power. So in total, what's available currently is probably under 50 gigawatts. And if you take that benchmark that I put out, then you can just see how far the gap is. And if we're going to create jobs, if we're going to industrialize, I'll come back to that if time permits later.
Yes,
for me,
thank you.
These are the key domains that I would refer to as far as the macro environment is concerned. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that, Dr. Salami. So I'll go to you, Mr. Zubike. Similar question. From your personal perspective, how would you evaluate Nigeria's current economic reforms? Are we on the right track?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think a lot has been said in the earlier presentations, and I'll look at it from the context of the role that I play as working in the companies I lead, InfraCredit, which was set up to help to mobilize long-term finance in local currency for infrastructure development by helping de-risk private sector to attract investments. Now, the key concerns that I'd say institutional investors, but also private sector struggle with are the macros that have been highlighted. So firstly, and when we typically have these conversations at the credit committee and investment committee, it's the interest rate environment. And so we have a high inflation environment that affects interest rates. But also what this does is that it impacts on the cost of essential services. And so whilst we anticipate that foreign exchange should stabilize hopefully this year, but over the past year, we saw a significant impact on projects overrunning. The foreign exchange volatility had significant impact on the cost of projects. We had experienced quite a number of extensions of size of projects that were being implemented simply because the initial cost was impacted ultimately by the FX volatility. So what we hope to see is ultimately with the reforms being put in place, less impact on foreign exchange in terms of how do we ensure that as we support projects that are raising money in local currency, because one of the big challenges we've seen is that you can't borrow in foreign currency to finance an asset that your revenues are being paid for by service providers that are earning in local currency. And this has shown that, ultimately, most companies need to look at alternative sources of funding. It is, not a silver bullet to address the concerns, but what we hope to see is where increased innovation in private sector, where we look at what are the potential opportunities that exist in our local markets, where we're able to support, private sector investments under public-private partnerships, where, we're increasingly seeing where government can help in de-risking projects by providing the necessary investments that can attract private capital. So hopefully the outlook for this year will be driven by moderation in interest rates, stabilization of foreign exchange, lower inflation, and better policy environment that can enable more private capital investment, especially much needed equity to enhance the debt that is available. The opportunity does exist in terms of the capital that can be mobilized. If you look at it from even just across the continent, within our pensions, asset managers, sovereign wealth funds, and insurance companies, AFDB estimates that we have about 2.5 trillion under management that can be mobilized for private finance.
Right. Thank you.
We have been able to support that financing in Nigeria, but the expectation is that scaling will be needed with a more enabling environment.
Thank you very much for that. We'll come back to you for more on ideas for financing infrastructure in Nigeria. Mrs. Adelekon, from your current role where you sit as the Group CEO of Agusto & Co., can you share your perspectives on the current reforms and whether or not you believe we're on the right track?
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Wanu, for that question. So I would like to approach it from a sovereign risk rating perspective. In terms of looking at two critical reforms, we view it positively. The reforms in terms of unification of the exchange rate, which has created a more transparent market, and therefore we have more liquidity. I would also look at the reforms around petrol subsidies. What you can see is increased cash flow for the federal government as well as the subnationals. For the investment bankers in the room, you'll find out that in the last 6 months, we haven't had a state government come and issue a bond, which wasn't the norm. So even in our strategy session, we started to look at things critically and say it's clear that the cash flow of state governments have improved significantly. So we look at those two reforms as a credit positive for the federal government of Nigeria. Another part we look at critically, and we look at it positively as well, is in terms of the reserves, the strategic investment decision, to raise a Euro bond of about 2.2 billion, and also the diaspora bond that was done domestically has helped raise the reserve. So we have a 40 billion reserve now, which gives about 6.2 import cover, which is quite good. In the past, we were looking at import cover about 3 months. So in terms of the reforms, we think that some critical areas have been positive. Where would we want to see more? We would like to see more in terms of deficit management. Like Jimmy talked about in his presentation, we're looking at debt to GDP, deficit to GDP ratio of 4.5%, whereas the Fiscal Responsibility Act says the guidance is 3%. So we need to do more to moderate that. The persistent inflation, despite what Mr. Oyedele says, it's a concern. And it's affecting a lot of businesses. It's affecting the real sector adversely because of the high interest rates being used to combat inflation. So we would like to see more in that particular area. But in terms of my view, I think we're in a much better place in 2025 as of January compared to what we were in 2024. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Adelekon. So I'm moving to you now, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. We often say the financial services sector is the heart of any economy. So we'd also like to hear from your perspective, and the industry that you operate in. So how would you evaluate the current reforms? And again, the same question, do you think that we're on the right track?
Thank you, Wonu. On a lighter note, like I told you, by the time Dr. Salami finished speaking and Yinka and Chinua, there won't be anything, they would have skinned the meat and there won't be anything for me to say. Okay, but once again, Yinka and team, thank you for this opportunity. Like I told you earlier, I and Bode's paths crossed as far back as 1994. And when he used to go around the banks seeking for banks to permit him to rate them. And that transformed to what we have at Agusto today. So it was somebody I so much cherish the memories of our relationship. Back to your question. If you look at what I would say, if I have to answer you with one sentence, I would say that, look, the government, the environment today is stalled on policies and weak or short on execution. We've seen what Taiwo presented here today. I mean, I was short of standing up to go and hug him. But the question you ask yourself, the government, are they even moving towards the direction of the tax reform policies? Last 2 weeks, we were battling with increase in MPA charges, 4% and 15%. We've seen a government that says a different thing and does a different thing. And I think that's the bane of the challenge we have today. If you look at the financial market, for instance, you saw the government said that they are going to abide by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, they would stop borrowing. But last year, we know the government borrowed 31 trillion naira from the economy. 13 trillion naira by way of treasury-based auctions, 11 trillion naira by way of OMO auctions, about 5.8 trillion naira by bonds. And all those three, you ask yourself, what was that money used for? And that further elevated our national debt. So in terms of what the government is saying and doing, they are contradictory. And it looks like some of the policy pronouncements are counterbalanced by actions of government. Like I said, we saw what Taiwo spoke extensively on the tax reform bills. But we've seen constantly, since Taiwo was appointed, he has kept saying that we're going to reduce the number of taxes. We're going to harmonize the tax collection process. But what we have seen is that the taxes are being increased, and that does not speak well of the macroeconomic environment as it relates to the financial services sector. Then, looking further at what are those things that drive financial system stability, you have to look at the overall macroeconomic stability. And if you look at the GDP figure for the third quarter of last year, you observe that though the economy grew at 3.46%, the growth was very fragile, and nobody's talking about that. If you look at that, the greatest contributor to the GDP, I mean, a couple of people have spoken about that, is the agricultural sector. Agricultural sector accounts for about 28% of the GDP. That sector grew by 1.14%. So it's not strange we're having food insecurity. When population is growing about 2.4, 2.5%, the sector that creates the highest level of employment, that feeds the population, is growing about 1.14%. What are the other big hitters in the economy? You look at the telecommunications sector. That growth rate had dropped from about 13% to about 5.9% third quarter of last year. Then the next sector is trade sector. Trade sector grew about only 0.65%. Then you look at manufacturing sector, 0.92% growth. And these sectors, if you sum them up, they account for more than 60%, 70% of the GDP. So these sectors are supposed to feed the financial services sector, create macroeconomic stability. If you go further and you look at...
Thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you. We'll come back to you very, very quickly on, those initiatives you think that the government can implement. So, but it's time for Mr. Onofo-Okon to give us his perspective from the real sector, the manufacturing perspective on the current economic reforms. So if you could just share your thoughts with us very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to take it from a different perspective because I think sometimes we go too technical on words and leave reality of what the actual real sector is facing. Now, the macroeconomic situation that we find ourselves in is that, look, interest rates, let's look at the base rate at 27.5%, in real terms means to a manufacturer is a 35 to 36% by the time you add the spread into it. Now, how many businesses in Nigeria can run on 35% interest rate? You find out what is happening is that it turns back into the commercial sector and into the banking sector as how do I avoid NPL, non-performing loans. I see 35%, I see risk. And immediately I see risk, I look at it, for every 1,000 naira I'm giving you, can you make 35 naira on every, 350 naira on every 1,000? Most likely not in this current economy. Now, so which means as a business, I won't even borrow you money. I'd rather take my money and put it in treasury bills. So 31 trillion means the commercial bank are smiling treasury bills. And when you speak to investment bankers today, everybody will say trade on the long because this interest rate is smiling business for now. It is not lending business. Let's be realistic. So that's the economy we are in. So from an industrialist perspective, we are struggling. You're taking a hit on the negative position of the FX losses of 2023, of 2024, and you are in a situation where, thank God, now we are in a position of stability, where the disparity between the parallel market and the official market is now getting to a marginal state where you're getting a conversion that is a lot better than what we had in the past 1 year. And that's for any business, it means indecision. It means the ability to actually make long-term decisions are dead. Immediately, actually, strategic decisions are dead. And that means growth was stifled. That means you have growth on the economic policies regarding industry, GDP rate only growing at 0.9%. Now, but in all that, I must say, and this is not a popular statement, are we going in the right direction? I'll say yes. Now, the reason why I'll say yes is that we've managed to do one thing. You know, I'm a realist and I'm an industrialist that has suffered every aspect of Nigeria in the last 2 decades, ups and downs. And the worst is always the FX. It hits every industry badly. 2016 March, Emefiele's madness hit a lot of us badly. Literally, it wiped off companies like mine in 1 day. But I'm here today is another story. But when you look at it, when you put that into perspective, take out the FX losses, you tend to also find out that we are not, as a country or as a business, focused on the long-term macro stability of any business. I'm sorry, I don't think most bankers, I like them, they're all my friends. I always tell them, you struggle when you retire because you're only thinking transaction back in 30 days, 90 days, maximum 1 year. Now, how do you get a business to sustain long-term? Which means that you have a manufacturer that is looking from a micro-small. I started from micro-small, 50 workers. Today, I'm the largest business in the continent. It needs certain people thinking long with you. And we need to actually have macro policies that actually get people thinking long. And part of it is also simple things like the fiscal policy. Today, we missed our 2024 fiscal policy, and everybody's asking for manufacturing growth. It's going to not happen. Now, today, we're still talking about 2025 fiscal policy reforms to be signed off. So a lot of things don't happen as quickly as we have. We have stability in the currency today, but we have a lot to still do.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Onofoko. So back to you, Dr. Salami. I mean, you've given us your thoughts on the economy and the reforms, but I would ask you now a bit more specifically on the tax reforms and your thoughts on how effective it will be at strengthening Nigeria's fiscal position.
Well, it's difficult to say. Indeed, as Taiwo left, I was saying to him that, look, one piece that is missing in all the conversation are projections. Where is the data that says, if we do it this way, this is what we expect to meet? Whether at the end of the day you will meet that, that's a different matter. But at least you can make certain assumptions, and then it enables us clarity about where we are. My sense is twofold. That those things that he said they are trying to achieve absolutely need to be achieved. And so to that extent, we probably have no choice anyway. We're going to have to do them. But it's important to look at the data so that we can preempt those pieces that we don't like and be able to deal with them. The second piece, because fiscal is not just tax policy, fiscal is also spending policy. And for me, I've read pieces that say, oh, the government is too big, you have to reduce the size of the government, that fiscal consolidation. Forgive me, you have to go back to the numbers. The spend per Nigerian, if you take a figure around 200 million, is still under $200 per person per year. And it is in that figure that we want to fix health. You want to fix defense. You want to fix education. We want to fix law and order, a whole panoply of things. For me, what we need at the fiscal level are two things. First, on the revenue side, we need to manage the national balance sheet more aggressively. Nigeria has assets that are underperforming. I, for example, see no reason why the government of Nigeria keeps 60% of JV ventures. It makes absolutely no sense. And I'm hoping that a proper privatization program, or first of all, preceded by a proper review of the national balance sheet, such that you manage the balance sheet in a way that revenue really comes in, not just from taxes. The second piece is the piece around spending. Our spending needs to be more efficient and more effective. The way we've typically assessed budget performance is how much we spend. We don't assess budget performance on whether we delivered anything with the spend that we have made. When you listen to the National Assembly, the state assemblies, all they speak about is, what proportion of the budget did you spend? Nobody is asking the real question, which should actually be, what did your spend translate into? And until and unless that is the fundamental question on the spending side, we won't make progress. But as I say, on the revenue side, you must ensure the national balance sheet is well managed. One final point. Nigeria must ensure that the currency, the naira, returns to holding value. Currently, the naira is not a store of value. For as long as net yields are negative, the pressure on the currency will continue. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, this economy has chosen over the last 40 years to democratize access to dollars, essentially as a risk management strategy. And so unless we reverse that, and it's not going to happen quickly, then you really must ensure as government that the naira must hold that capacity to store value. Currently, it doesn't.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Salami. So back to you, Chinua. We'd just like for you to, educate us on the biggest challenges in your view that's holding back infrastructure financing in Africa, Nigeria specifically, and those initiatives that you think are critical to sustaining, to driving investment in infrastructure in Nigeria.
Thank you again. I think I already said a bit in my earlier statement, but I think there's several experiences we've had over the past years, especially when we look at some of the lessons learned. I think, when we try to solve for today, it's also useful to look at the lessons of yesterday. So a good example is the subnational governments and how they raise finance. I think Yinka just mentioned that we are not seeing enough state government bond issuances. However, back in the day, they were very active in the capital markets. What we've seen is that there are new ways of enabling private capital to help subnationals to be able to leverage new investments to deliver projects. I'll give a good example. States tend to use their ISPOs to raise funding. Over time, they've been locked out of the capital markets, especially the pension funds, because they're not meeting their requirements from PENCOM. But at the same time, this prevents development from happening in these states. What we've tried to do is work with some subnationals where they put in the right enabling environment for public-private partnerships, where private sector can participate, bid for projects, and they provide a risk-sharing instrument by providing what they call minimum availability payments that help to hedge against revenue risk. This allows private sector to raise financing to build, operate, and ultimately transfer projects. We're currently in the process of supporting a 20-year bond in the capital markets on the balance sheet of the private sector in order to help construct a toll road in one of the subnational governments. We expect to see a replication of this across many other states. And this goes to really how subnationals, and I'm focusing on subnationals because they play a very critical role when we think about infra development in Nigeria. We look at how they plan, how they prioritize spending, but importantly, the capacity support that is needed in their respective PPP offices to ensure that they're able to select and prepare the right projects that can attract private sector participation. So this is important when we look at how we leverage PPPs, but importantly, when we also look at the role that the private sector play in financing projects that are not necessarily dependent on government balance sheet. 2 years ago, we supported the Lagos Free Zone with a guarantee to raise a 20-year bond from local pension funds for the development of the Free Zone. Now, we hope to see more of these type of projects happen. By doing this, we're able to leverage the private sector, use our pensions and other long-term investments that are available in a risk-adjusted way. One thing, again, to mention is the resilience of the private sector. I think Mr. George has just spoken on the experience. We tend to underestimate how the corporate actually, over time, demonstrate stronger resilience that is actually perceived to be. And even, for example, if you look at Ghana, despite the default at the sovereign level, we've seen several corporates that have actually outperformed that perception of risk. So increasingly, we expect to see where the reforms being implemented, hopefully, would allow for more private capital to come through balance sheets of private sector, especially how we mobilize our domestic resources, which is significant enough at least to begin to attract the interest of international capital.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Zwiki. Mrs. Adelekon, so what role do you believe that credit rating agencies have to play in driving debt capital market in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you. I think Chino has said quite a bit. In terms of rating agencies, so typically what's our role? Our role is to assess obligors and their ability to fulfill their obligations by looking at their financial condition. When it pertains to infrastructure projects, we typically look at the financial health of the infrastructure project and also look at the risk inherent in that project and try as much as possible to ensure that the risks are mitigated so that investors get their funds. So by issuing ratings, what typically rating agencies do is that we boost investors' confidence in the market, and also because we also help in lowering the cost of capital. The higher your ratings, the lower your cost of raising funding in this market relative to other borrowers in the market. So the debt market provides the opportunity for funding for infrastructure projects. And just to elaborate on what Chinua was talking about, the Lagos Free Zone, which is a subsidiary of, I think, the Tolaram Group, they were able to raise 3 series of 20-year money, which would have been totally difficult for the banks to do. But they raised it on the back of their financial condition as well as the guarantee of infracredit. And infracredit is rated AAA by Agusto and other rating agencies. So they were able to raise 20-year money. I think the last one they did was in 2023 at about 15.25. That's a fixed rate, 15.25 for 20 years for the development of the economic zone. So what is clear to me is that there's an opportunity for infrastructure projects to be funded by the debt market. It exists. The size of the market is there. We have the PFA funds. The challenges are still there. I mean, those are critical challenges. When we talk about funding gap, we talk about lack of bankable projects. Chinua and I talk from time to time, the lack of bankable infrastructure projects, and that because there's some government political risk inherent in that. So there are challenges like that. Also, duplication of government policies that affects infrastructure projects. But can they raise funding in this market? Yes, if things are if they're well structured. And can the rating agencies help boost investors' confidence? Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Adilekon. Back to you, Mr. Chiku. In your earlier remarks, you spoke about how we talk a lot about the policy, but we don't actually act on it. So I would just like to ask, what initiatives, in your view, do you think the government can institute to ensure that the current reforms are successful at strengthening the financial market?
I think the starting point is that the government needs to drive or to move towards a more prudent fiscal policy implementation or approach. And because that is necessary for us to have a stable macroeconomic environment. If you look at what we have today, where the government's total revenue projection for 2025 is now about 40 trillion. It was 36.3 trillion. They moved it to about 40 trillion. When the projected expenditure is about 49.7 trillion. So there was already a projected deficit about 13 trillion. They now projected that we're going to get another 4.5 trillion revenue. So instead of reducing the projected deficit to about 9 trillion, they have increased further the expenditure by that 4.5 trillion. What that government also knows that when I say that we have to implement a more prudent fiscal framework, is that government knows that it cannot achieve 40 trillion revenue. Government have projected it to earn about 19.6 trillion from crude oil sales, or crude oil revenue. As at August last year, total government revenue, federal government revenue was about 12.6 trillion. So if you interpolate that, it gives you about 16 trillion for the full year. So there's no way the government will produce 2 million barrels a day. I mean, Jimmy's report said at best we do 1.5 million barrels a day. So we know that's not achievable. So if we continue with an overly optimistic and unrealistic fiscal plan, what we do, we inject liquidity into the economy. When we inject liquidity into the economy, it drives up exchange rate, it drives up inflation rate, and those factors work against the monetary policy environment, monetary environment, because you're going to deal with high interest rate environment, which disincentivizes people to go into this sector productive activities, work against the equity market, and work against capital formation. So these are factors that government has recognized. We need a more prudent fiscal plan that will ensure we have stable macroeconomic environment, low interest rate environment, stable exchange rate, low inflation rate. If we continue to inject liquidities from funding by ways and means, we will continue to deal with unstable macroeconomic environment, and that does not work well for a stable financial system.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Onofokon, I mean, we've spoken about the resilience of the real sector. I mean, both you and Mr. Zubiki alluded to that. So it would be good to hear, what opportunities, based on the current macroeconomic status, what opportunities you believe exist for operators in the real sector, and what key risks do you think are often ignored?
Are there opportunities? They're always going to be. The reality is we have a population greater than 200 million. We have a very youthful population. And in any manufacturer for any industry, basically, when you look at it, the population itself is a driving market. Now, simple, taking FMCG into account, you sell one bottle of drink to 1 million people a day. You multiply that by 30 days, multiply that by 12 months. There's a market. There's always going to be a market. And the opportunities are always going to be there in the Nigerian market sense. Now, for me, I look at the perspective that we need to beg to ask ourselves the question, why do we always as Nigerians think that Nigeria is that difficult? Now, until you actually rethink the tool and rethink your head and find out there are actually more foreigners in industry than Nigerians, then you beg to ask the question, why are the foreigners staying here and the Nigerians saying it's not viable? It's something of a mismatch. I am the chairman of the Ogun State, and I sign every new manufacturer that is joining. Out of every 10 I sign every month, 8 are foreigners. I'll be lucky sometimes if I find one Nigerian that is on that factory list. And that's a sad story. And we're still saying that there are no opportunities. There are massive opportunities. Now, you've got a massive population. You've got the opportunity of actually doing business within this country. Within, yes, it's constrained. The risks are there. Nobody is saying there's no risk. The associated risks are there. Infrastructure-related risk, political-related risk, fiscal somersault risk, I call it, because you wake up one day, just like Dr. John said, someone wakes up tomorrow and says 4% FOB charges on all import. Does not make sense, for God's sake. Thank God someone actually rationalized it, that it needs to be suspended, because that's an immediate impact on every import, every raw material, every cost associated. Automatically, I will pass it on to you. And as I pass it on to you, what happens next? Inflationary figures goes up, and everything else goes haywire. Now we've stopped that. Now, take the risk associated with business in Nigeria. I think the biggest major risk is ourselves as Nigerians. It's not the foreigners. Now, until you de-risk, and this is my big push for everybody, we need to de-risk ourselves. Until we can de-risk ourselves, and I explain why I say we need to de-risk ourselves, for us to have opportunity to capex, capital, opportunities to actually develop the businesses, and actually develop businesses the right way with the right corporate governance. Now, what I mean by that is that I asked one question to my chairman, who had been in business for more than 50, 60 years of his life, and he's run conglomerates, he's run PLCs. Now, I asked him one day he said to me, he said, yeah, you are all right because you're getting money from the banks. But these banks always only give money to the foreigners. And I said, sir, with all due respect, I'm going to ask you a simple risk question. And I said, you've been in business for more than 60 years of your life. He said, yes. My simple question is this. If in that 60 years you've known friends that have borrowed money, he said, yes. And I said, this is my question. Immediately they borrowed the money. Which one of them, I didn't say what happened after, which one of them did not do one of the following? Immediately they borrowed the money. Build new houses, buy new cars, buy new, divest or anything else, marry new wives. And my dear father just looked at me and sighed with, he couldn't answer the question quickly. So I had to help him. I said, 5%, 10, 15, 20. By the time I got to 20, the man grabbed it. 20. Sir, I just said in 60 years, you've just told me 8 out of every 10 literally did one of the following. So now, how do we de-risk Nigerians? That means for everybody I approach for credit anywhere, they see me as that 80% of failure, of diversion. So we have to actually retool the whole of Nigeria and the whole of the actual credit-based sector on how to believe that a black man walking into here, and if you look at the statistics, let's be sincere, and this is statistics not only for Nigeria. Take West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, South Africa. The black Africans are in that 80% of risk. So when they enter any business, they see them as an high risk. So that risk element is how do we, I think as a people, start working at de-risking ourselves to be able to, and lastly, and I think we need to just allow me this one. Sat in a meeting 10 years ago with a bank, I won't say the bank in the UK, discussing a transaction of $10 million. And there's one foreigner in between us listening at all the conversation. After 30 minutes of listening to us discussing this transaction, first question the person asked, ED of the bank sitting in the UK Nigerian bank, asked the first question, please, I've listened to all of you talk about this credit. If I'm a Nigerian or a person that walks into your business, how do I get funding from you? Would I be able to seek funding or get funding? The first answer from that ED of the bank is, would you give me? And the person said, divine intervention. That's the only reason I'll give you the funds. And that tells you the problem. So that's our risk. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Onoforkon. So I'll come back to you, Dr. Salami. So we've, pretty much evaluated the current reforms. We've talked about a few things that the government can do better. But it would be good to hear from your perspective if there are opportunities that you see that still exist for businesses in Nigeria at the current pace of reforms.
Well, absolutely, and I think George already alluded to that, but I will drive my own sense of opportunity from two dimensions. The first, the NBS is shortly going to release the rebased consumer price basket, and a couple of things. Number one, the proportion of our income spent on food is diminishing. They think, or at least in the rebased basket, I think it's going to be about 41% or thereabout. Nigeria is moving away from a subsistence economy. In what direction she's moving remains to be seen. The second piece in that are the biggest opportunities in Nigeria right now on the basis of that basket. One is human capital. And human capital is in two pieces, education and health. The share of education has gone up, I think, from 3.9% to 6.1%. The share of healthcare has doubled. But the third piece that I found in those numbers, very interesting, is that the share of accommodation and restaurants, not your regular rent, has gone up from 1.2 to 12%. So the hostels you pay for your children and all of that is now being brought into the consumer basket. So that's certainly one set of opportunities. The second set of opportunities I'd like to draw attention to are global. Globally, we are seeing a regionalization of supply chains. And so the key question is Nigeria going to position herself through trade, industry, and through trade and industry policies as a hub, whether leveraging the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Remember this, the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is 4 steps. The first step we've seen a lot of money go into is payment systems, PAPIs and the like. The next level is logistics. The third level is going to be the movement of people. Then the final level is where the production of goods and services. For me, these are major opportunities, but Nigeria has to have one conversation that she has been avoiding. What is the role of exchange rates in development? All of us in this room have an interest in a strong currency. We carry international bills. The economy's interest may be very different from our interest, but it's a conversation that must be had. What is the role of exchange rates in fostering and accelerating inclusive growth and development for Nigeria. Those would be my summary of the opportunities.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Salami. Back to you, Mr. Zubike. There's been a lot of conversation, not just in Nigeria, but globally on sustainable finance. So I guess my question to you will be, in your view, what opportunities exist for green finance to fund infrastructure in Nigeria?
Thank you. So I think the other panelists have mentioned around energy access. And I think if we look at some of the data, I think World Bank data estimates we have about 22 million generators generating about 5,000 gigawatts of energy, whilst about 5 gigawatts is what is generated on the grid. And then based on the recent presentation on the government's compact for energy transition, there's an estimated $23 billion required to achieve universal energy access. So if I look at energy as a market opportunity, renewable energy, especially distributed renewable energy, is estimated to be the least cost technology. So standalone systems, mini grids, distributed energy resources, and interconnected mini grids as well, is the least cost technology to connect at least over 17 to 23 million. We estimated to have over 80 million Nigerians that don't have energy access. So that's one of the highest in the world. But what we're seeing is that there's a recent initiative by the World Bank and the federal government under the Distributed Energy Access Program, $50 million. We anticipate that these initiatives could help to dramatically help to provide energy access to unserved, underserved, especially the SMEs and small businesses. And when we think about the constraints that impact on the informal sector, which employs about 87% of workforce and contributes about 47% to GDP, logistics and energy. And logistics increasingly can be electric, and we're seeing e-mobility in 2 and 3 wheels actually become increasingly more competitive than traditional sources of energy. Now it's the business models that can support long-term finance to enable the provision of these services on a sustainable basis. So there is an opportunity to leverage green finance. We've successfully been able to tap into low-cost finance from development agencies that help reduce the cost of financing to roughly around 11 to 12% by blending the high interest rate in the local environment. Now that can be scaled up. There's significant pools of capital. So when we think about transition, it is about development, and there's a huge opportunity to tap into transition finance to accelerate the inclusive development using new business models that will create significant amount of jobs, especially for the young demographic, and reducing the barrier to access to finance and businesses. And I also want to emphasize the fact that alternative forms of capital exist. I know we tend to focus on banks, but when we think about the other forms of capital from the asset managers, the pensions, insurance, that are really looking for assets that are providing a yield and provide a risk-return adjustment protection. These allow first-time borrowers to access markets. So our guarantees have enabled companies that otherwise may not have access finance from the banks to actually go to capital market, raise finance, create jobs, and support economic growth. So we see a huge opportunity there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Mrs. Adlekon, can you just talk about the key risks, in your view, that the financial institutions in Nigeria are currently facing?
Okay, thank you, Wonu. For me, the critical risks that financial institutions are faced with are largely 3, in my view. The first one being the currency risk. For financial institutions that are long in terms of foreign currency liabilities, that's a critical issue for them. And even if you look at the banks, the amount of borrowings that they have in foreign currency, we did some work in Agusto and Co, and we looked at the top 10 banks, 8 out of the top 10 banks, and wanted to see how much they had expended on servicing their foreign currency loans in 2023 financial statement. And we found out they had doubled. In 2022, they expended about 200 billion on servicing their foreign currency obligations. By 2023 financial year, they had expended as much as 458 billion. So the currency depreciation is a significant part, and it also affects even their obligors. Another critical part is inflation, high inflation. If you look at inflation in terms of the obligors have suffered two ways, in terms of low purchasing power by the consumers of their product. Secondly, because the CBN has a tight monetary stance, they've increased interest rates to be able to fight inflation. So the MPR rate of about 27.5% as of November, and the bank's price on top of that. So if you look at what we're seeing, the high inflation, the impact it has on the banks is actually in the asset quality. What we have estimated this year that in absolute terms, we're expecting non-performing loans to grow by 40%, and we're looking at about 3.5 trillion. So of the total loans, 3.5 trillion will be impaired. And even though in percentage terms, it's below the 5% guidance. And why is it below the 5% guidance? Because the denominator is growing at the same tangent. 48% of the total loans of the banking industry is foreign currency. And lastly, I'm mindful of time around here, I know, it's the regulatory risk. Every time the regulations are changed, it has compliance implication, resources have to be deployed by financial institutions. But a key regulation that is important to mention is the fact that in 13 months, banks, deposit money banks, have to comply with the minimum capital raise. In 2004, I wanted to just say this, the banking industry raised 360 billion to be able to meet the capital requirement at that time. Now we're expecting them to raise 4 trillion in 13 months in a short period of time. The question is, will the unhealthy behavior that happened after the 2004 capital raise, does the CBN have the capacity to ensure that that is forestalled? Because there was a banking crisis not long after that capital raise, because the banks needed to make quick returns.
Thank you, Mrs.
And therefore,
Adileko.
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the passionate response. So, Mr. Chiku, back to you. Given everything that we've spoken to today and the comments from fellow panelists, I'd just like to know what asset classes do you think are most likely to succeed or thrive or bring the best opportunities, and which ones do you think will carry the most risk?
Well, if you look at where we are today in terms of global economic environment, Nigerian economic environment, because these variables are going to change, and they change almost on a daily basis. If you look at it, I think we are still going to deal with a high inflation period, and we're going to continue to deal with high interest rate environment in the near future, which means investors will continue to underweight their portfolios, or will most likely underweight their portfolios in variable income assets and overweight them in fixed income assets within the local environment. But if you look at the global environment, you will see a flight to safety, to safer asset classes. We've seen gold prices go above $2,000 per ounce. And I think that trend will likely continue because of the volatile global economic environment being created. So in terms of global asset investors, I think we are likely going to see a high interest environment in the US, because the US government has said they're going to bring down interest taxes on both corporate and personal income taxes. So if that happens, we should see them borrowing more by issuance of treasury bills, and that would drive up interest rate environment, which means that we're going to see a flight to safety, and we also see investors moving towards instruments of more stable economies.
All right, thank you very much for that, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. So, Mr. Onofoko, final question to you. Just what role do you think the debt capital market today has to play in easing the funding challenges of the manufacturing sector?
I think we have to look at it that today it is actually far more important than the actual conventional. I think in other economics, the debt capital market actually outweighs the commercial banks. Now, we need to actually, for someone like ours, I'm a family-run business that became rated 3 years ago. and made BBB on the first rating. Today we're an A-rated company by Agusto and Co. And proudly so that I tell most of the people in the industry that we shouldn't shy away from the debt capital market. Now, when you look at it, it has leveraging power. I'll say today, I won't give figures because I'll be putting some banks into that corner. Now, the ability to have the alternatives changes the dynamics of your business dynamics. It's all about leveraging power. If today the banking system is doing 35, and I know that I can go into the market as an A-rated today at between 28 to 30, there's no way as a commercial bank I'll take your funds. And the only way you'll convince me to take that fund is to come within that same bracket. And sincerely today, I'm in that same bracket. So when what we need to do is encourage more. What scares people off is transparency. And what I say is transparency and corporate governance, you need to have to open your books up. You need to have better corporate governance to actually run. And what we need to actually now look at is how do you deepen the actual industries and the manufacturers finding the alternative and seeing the debt capital market moving away. And please, we need to please allow the manufacturers a little bit of leeway, because when I look at the debt capital market, I look at those raising CPs like myself, and I look at how many of them are actually manufacturers. And the question is how many of them are actually SMEs or medium scale. That is where I think the turn needs to come into, is how to actually get the actual middle ground of industry and manufacturing to actually move into the actual debt capital market, which will be helped by people like Chinoa who are wrapping debts around this actual and enabling those that maybe cannot make the BBB or the A to actually start filling the pores of the debt capital, and it will continue to deepen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, my dear panelists, my esteemed panelists. It's been a very insightful, very passionate conversation. Please give them a round of applause. We've overshot our time, and some of our panelists have a hard stop. So we'll just come out here for a quick photograph. Please join us, Chairman, sir. Before we go for the Q&A. Okay, Mrs. Edna Agusto, please join us. Okay. Yes. We'll be taking questions from the audience. Okay. So if you have questions, you can just write them down and share to... yes, we'll be available for discussions after, but questions can be sent via email as well to info@agusto.com.
So you're doing the closing remarks, right? Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much. So on behalf of the board, management, and staff of Agusto & Co., I would like to thank First and foremost, our chairman for today's event, Mr. Fola Adiola, our keynote speaker, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, panelists, Dr. Salami, Mrs. Adelekod, Mr. Zubike, Mr. Nofoko, and of course, Mr. Johnson Chuku. I would also like to thank Mrs. Edna Agusto, the wife of our beloved, the wife of our late founder, and the entire Agusto family. I would like to thank all our invited guests and online participants. We're grateful for your time, and we do not take it lightly that you've been here today. We look forward to receiving you at future events. Thank you.